Hello, lovers of God. What would you do if your grandfather received the stigmata? This is exactly what happened in 1993 to the Michigan grandfather, Irving Houle, a very normal blue-collar factory worker who enjoyed fishing in Miller Lite. He received the wounds of Christ. And this is one of my favorite stories on the stigmata because it shows that these supernatural events are not just reserved for the priests, monks, and nuns. They are even available to the blue-collar factory worker father and grandfather. We have covered the stigmata in previous episodes. We've covered the theology of the stigmata. We've covered many of the medieval saints who've experienced it. So if you have not checked those episodes out, please like, subscribe, and listen to them. But this story is so fresh, it's so unique, and also I find it's not really well known. So I hope you enjoy this episode, and also join me as we pray for the future canonization of Irving Houle, the grandfather with the stigmata. I hope you enjoy. Fishing lures. That is what was on the mind of 67-year-old Irving Houle as he was trying to focus in early April of 1993. He stood there in his small cluttered work shed organizing his tackle box. He was long retired, and figuring out the perfect lure for the perfect catch is about the only thing that was on Irving's mind these days. But lately, there was something else that had been plaguing his thoughts, that had been running rampant through the mind of this grandfather and retiree. It began with the voices. After Mass one day, he heard a sweet, soothing voice telling him that he should prepare to receive holy wounds. Irving initially shook it off, and he dare not tell anyone. Heaven knows what would happen if a 67-year-old man told his doctor that he was hearing voices, and what worse conclusions would happen if he told his wife. "I'm of sound mind and I know it," Irving told himself. "After my retirement, I actually feel sharper than ever." So Irving, still standing over his tackle box, he shook off the intrusive thoughts about the voices. But as he closed the lid to the green plastic tackle box, a pain shot through his palms, and he was reminded of his second worry, his hands. As he looked down at them, as he looked down at these calloused hands from a life of hard work, there they were, two bright red blisters forming in the center of his palms. Most of the time, they did not hurt, they did not feel any pain. And then other times, they hurt him intensely and radiated a heat that could be felt throughout his entire body. "That's it. I'm going," he said to himself, shoving his palms into his coat pocket as he bolted out of his work shed. He then walked at a brisk pace towards Holy Cross Church just down the road, and he vowed that this time he would do it. This time he was going to talk to his priest about the voice, about the hands, and about the other weird things that were going on. But as he opened the big double doors and stood in line for confession, his mind got the best of him. So he exited the line, and he made his way towards the door. But as he walked to the exit, he caught a glimpse of the stained glass that was depicting the Stations of the Cross, images that he had seen hundreds, if not thousands of times as a Catholic man in his late 60s. But this time, in a hard-to-explain way, the images just seemed more alive. They were more radiant. It was as if these were frames from a movie rather than glass. Irving then noticed he wasn't walking, but instead he was staring at the 11th station. Jesus is nailed to the cross. The image depicted a Roman soldier gripping the wrist of the agonized Christ. The image looked so surreal, it looked so realistic. Irving could even see an indentation where the soldier was harshly gripping Christ's wrist. The soldier was also holding up the nail, while a ghostly hand was preparing a large, brutish hammer. It looked so alive that Irving almost winced in anticipation of the coming blow that was not seen. The pain on Jesus' face. It looked so authentic and harrowing, and the eyes, which Irving only recalled previously as dark circles, now they seemed to have whites around them, and an iris, and even a reflection. And Irving saw himself reflected in the image of Christ crucified, quite literally, as he stood there in awe of the stained glass. And it was then that the voices returned. "Consecrate yourself to my mother," the voice said. "She will look after you. I am surrounding you with people who will also look after you. My peace is always with you. Now go and prepare yourself." Irving pulled his hands out of his pockets, tears in his eyes. He looked down at his palms, and then at Christ's palms in the glass. And then he went home to prepare. This is another episode of St. Anthony's Tongue, and this is Irving Houle. Peace be with you and with your spirit. Welcome to another episode of St. Anthony's Tongue. I'm your host, W. So before we get into one of my favorite stigmatists of all time, the grandpa stigmatist, Irving Hu, let's do a quick refresher on the stigmata. I did a series in April of 2024 on the stigmata. It begins with an episode on St. Francis of Assisi, and it covers many stigmatists, including St. Lucardus, St. Gemma Galgani, and many more. But in that first episode, in the Francis of Assisi episode, I also provide an overview on what the stigmata is, as well as why. And the why is perhaps more important. If you are listening to this episode, chances are you understand what the stigmata is. If not, very simply, it is when God allows someone to receive the wounds of Christ, often 2 in the palms, 2 in the feet, and then usually a side wound or perhaps the crown of thorns or all of them. But the question is why? Why? Why would God do this? Why would God allow this? And the answer is because of redemptive suffering. Christ, as he suffered on the cross, offered up his pain and suffering as a prayer for the salvation of others. And you and I, we can actually do the same. You and I are actually called to do the same. This is called redemptive suffering. When we fast every Friday, do you know why? Because we're supposed to offer up that discomfort on behalf of sinners. Our own sins included. We are in that sinners category, but perhaps those away from the church, perhaps an individual, perhaps someone that is within the church, but they might be in pain or something. Regardless, it is a way to use intercessory prayer. Fasting is one example. It's a common example, but you might be familiar with the phrase offer it up, and that is when we feel any kind of pain. Perhaps we have a cold. Perhaps we sprained an ankle. Every time we feel that pain, we can offer that pain as a sacrifice. We tell God, God, if I go through this pain and suffering with a good measure and good hope, please shine your face on those away from you or someone who has my prayer intentions. So this is called redemptive suffering, and that is a very quick rundown. I have a half an episode on it in my St. Francis episode. But this is redemptive suffering, is when we offer up pain and discomfort on behalf of others, and that is what Christ did, and we are called to mirror Christ. So when it comes to the stigmata, the stigmatist, they have redemptive suffering on steroids to the max degree. Not only are they offering up pain for others, but they are offering up the same wounds of Christ for others. So in theory, their intercessory power is incredibly productive, incredibly potent. We can offer up a cold or a sprained ankle, or if we have a terminal illness, that too, or a chronic illness, that too. But here, the stigmatist, they are offering up something supernatural. So the stigmatist is important because it falls into this category of redemptive suffering. Not many people talk about that. So please take that nugget of wisdom with you. But one of my favorite stigmatists is a stigmatist who is rather modern, and he is one of my favorites just because how unique his story is. but he passed away only in 2009, and that is Irving Hu. And this is a very fascinating case study in the stigmata for many reasons. First, it is pretty modern. His stigmata occurred in 1993, and as I said, he passed away in 2009. When it comes to very powerful and notable cases of the stigmata, there have been many around the world, but perhaps the most influential one was Padre Pio, and that was in the 60s. So now we have a pretty large gap. I'm not saying none occurred since from 1960, I think it was 5 to 1993. Many have claimed to have a stigmata, but none really have amount of substance like Irving Hu. And the other is that he was a married man and grandfather, and by all accounts, a pretty regular guy. I don't get to this in what I wrote for the episode, but his grandchildren were interviewed a few times, and one of them said, yeah, he had the stigmata, but what I remember the most is going fishing with him and drinking Miller Lite with him. A very regular man. And perhaps the only instance of a married man receiving the stigmata. And another thing is, unlike many stigmatists, he went through Christ's passion nightly. Other stigmatists, they perhaps only felt the pains of the wounds maybe once a week, perhaps once a month, some only during Lent. But he went through them nightly, which was very rare. And lastly, perhaps one of the most interesting is he was called to lay hands. He was called to a healing ministry, and this was incredibly rare for a stigmatist. He's the only one that I can really think of that had the stigmata and then was called to do this. Of course, you have stigmatists who did pray for people and do very miraculous healings, Padre Pio, Gemma Galgani, but he was actually told, put your stigmatized hands on people and pray, which is very, very interesting. So let's begin with the life of Irving Hu. So Irving was born on December 27th, 1925 in Wilson, Michigan, and he actually had a miraculous experience with Christ from a young age. He was only 4 years old, and he was riding a horse with an older boy, and then he fell off the horse, and he fell onto a railroad tie, and it broke his ribs, which also punctured a lung, and he was hemorrhaging very badly, and it was not expected that he would make it. However, the next day, he was fine, completely recovered. There were no signs of internal damage. There was barely even bruising. And that day, Irving asked his mom a question. He asked her, "Who is the beautiful, glowing man that came into my room?" Of course, his mother asked him what he was talking about, and Irving said a glowing man appeared in his room and put his hands on him. And when he put his hands on him, he did not hurt anymore. So this miraculous healing, first off, is miraculous in of itself. And then the apparition of a man, this led his family to go and tell the bishop, who mused, quite simply, it must have been Jesus. So Irving was very devout even as a young boy. His siblings would recount how he'd pray over everything, including the firewood he would chop for his family, and how he would start every morning and night with prayer, even as young as 8 or 9 years old. And they were a Catholic family, but they were not as devout as Irving was, which was a little odd for the time. Eventually, he would move to Escanaba, Michigan, where he would then join the military. He served in the war. He was honorably discharged. He married a woman named Gail LaChapelle. They had 5 kids, and I'm going through this quickly on purpose. He worked many jobs over the years. He worked in manufacturing. He worked as a plant manager, very blue-collar, regular old Joe. He would later retire and live a very simple life with his wife, kids, and grandkids. He was a member of the Knights of Columbus, and he was very involved at his local church. And he was also known to have a devotion to the Rosary as well as the Divine Mercy Chaplet. And everything was pretty normal, just a normal blue-collar Michigan grandpa. That is until the voices started. So in 1993, at the beginning of Lent, Irving received an interlocution. If you're not familiar with what an interlocution is, it's essentially a voice, but it's a mystical experience, and it is a bit different from just hearing a voice like your own thoughts. There's some more context to that. But essentially, it's a voice from God that you hear. And the voice said this: "My beloved son, I'm asking you to prepare yourself, my son, to receive my holy wounds. I will be using you in a special way, but I need you to continue to pray. Place your complete trust in me and do not be afraid of the future, for I will give you the necessary graces to accept this gift. You will be persecuted, as I was persecuted. Later, he would receive another message saying, I want you to consecrate yourself to my mother. That way you will become closer to me. For she was blessed above all creatures, but she was hidden during her lifetime by the Holy Spirit. She will look after you and protect you, and I am surrounding you with people who you can also trust when you have your difficulties. Go to them and I will speak to you through them. You will know these people by the peace in your heart. My peace is always with you, my son. Now go and prepare yourself. So around this time, Irving began receiving pains and marks in his hands, as well as his head, but he kept them a secret. But when the pain and the voices continued, he confided in his brother Reynold about what was going on. And then finally, on Good Friday of 1993, Irving would receive the stigmata. He called his brother to be there with him because he knew it was coming. His brother was with him there that night for the first stigmata and continued to sit with Irving over the next few months, and he would experience the stigmata that would occur nightly. And this is his testimony, which was given in the book, A Man Named Francis. On Sunday night, June 6, 1993, Irving and I had gone to bed around 11:30 p.m. Irving had told me that he was getting some bad pains on his head. Irving was sleeping in a single bed in my spare bedroom. At 12:45 a.m., Irving called and said to me, Ren, do you want to come in and place your hands on my head? You may receive some special graces. I think I'm getting the crown of thorns. But now you don't have to if you don't want to, he said. I was awake when he called me, and he'd been saying the Chaplet of Divine Mercy. I went to his bedroom, and it was like he was out of it. It's like he was not there. He had no idea I was there. I put my hands on his head. I don't think he knew that I had my hands on his head, though, or even that I was in the room. He was so out of it. It seems I may have been called in to witness what he was going through. Maybe I was meant to record it. I don't know. Irvin had told me earlier that what I was seeing meant I was the first one to witness his purification suffering. You see, at night after 12 a.m. is when the greatest number of sins are committed. So the suffering I witnessed started with his head pains, the crowning of thorns. Then the pain went to his feet, and his feet were moving all over the place, as if they were in great pain. It's like he was being crucified through the feet. Then the pain went to his hands, and his movements were very slow, and he would holler and make these mournful sounds. By Irving's movements and the moaning in great pain, I could see I was witnessing the sufferings of our Lord when he was crucified. And I could see it all just step by step. And this started the night of June 7th, 1993. It started at 12:50 a.m. and it ended around 1:25 a.m. And here I saw Irving's purification suffering. So I went to get the camera and I took this picture, which I'm sending you right now. So when I first went into his room, I placed my hands on his head for about 10 minutes, and I could tell he was suffering the agony of the crowning of thorns. I noticed that the pain then went down to his feet because he was moving them slowly while he was moaning in great pain. And after the foot movement, Irving slowly, very slowly, moved his right hand up and stretched it out, as if someone was guiding his hand to prepare it for the first nailing. There was no sound at this time. Then I noticed a lot of finger movements. It looked and sounded like he was being nailed to the cross. Irving was moaning in quick, agonizing groans. I could tell that he was in terrible pain, and I felt so bad. So I said to Jesus, I'm sorry that they did this to you. Then I could see that his hands were outstretched and being nailed down. Again, his moaning changed to long moans. He was in great agony. Even though I could see that his hands had been nailed down in the suffering Irving was going through, he kept moving his fingers over and over and over, making really loud sounds. When his left hand moved off his chest very slowly, it was as if someone was guiding it up to be nailed. It went right past me while I was kneeling near his bed. And I thought at first he was reaching for my rosary that was lying there, but all the while it was his left hand stretching out to be nailed. Now, I don't mean that I myself heard sounds of hammers pounding in big nails, no, but from Irving would come the irregular groan or shouts of pain like in the rhythm of nails being driven into his hands. Each pound he would holler in pain. It was so loud, if I had the windows open, I'm sure the neighbors would have heard and wondered and called the police. I could tell when both hands were stretched out, he had been nailed mystically through pain and suffering. It was a mystical crucifixion. Then all at once, he stopped moaning. I think this is where Jesus died on the cross because Irving stopped moaning. To note the death of Jesus, both arms seemed to go limp. His arms, they fell as if someone was taking him off the cross. After the arm fell, his arm movements were very, very slow. Then his arm slowly moved back to his chest as if someone was guiding it back, and finally there was no more movement. His head, it was turned to the right through all of this, just like one sees on the crucifix. And then it ended at 1:25 a.m. The next morning, after Irving got up and I left his room, I noticed blood was on the pillow, and I asked if he had put his hands up to the pillow, and he said no. When I went to brush off the pillow, I found a small thorn. The wound marks on his hands are both on his palms and the top of his head. The inside of his palm, high on the hands, they look like nail heads. The top side is wide open. The size of the wounds vary from time to time. It seems that when he prays for people, the bleeding begins more and it becomes bigger. Irving tells me that he goes through the purification sufferings every single night. I understand the wounds bleed especially at special feasts, especially on the top. Inside the palm, they bleed especially when he prays over a lot of people. So now let's talk about the aftermath of the stigmata. So Irving Houle was always a reserved person. One could even say a shy person to an extent. If you recall, he did not even use his real name when he began his ministry. He went by Francis. So he was very to himself. He was even a bit embarrassed about all of this. That is why it is called the stigmata, right? It is a stigma of sorts. And the only reason we know this much up until now is because of those good people that Christ promised he would surround Irving with. One of those good people being his brother. So because of his brother, we have this testimony. And then later we have some priests and bishops that really took care of Irving. So I'm saying this to say we don't really know all of the details and specifics about what occurred from April to July or so of 1993. We have some descriptions of the stigmata from his brother. But we do know that he would eventually open up to his wife about it. In later interviews, he said that he felt God shielding her from the stigmata pains, and she would be in a deep sleep, so she didn't have to deal with this. And sometimes he would go into a guest room, or in his initial stigmata, or one of them, he would spend it at his brother's house. And we also know that he eventually went to go speak to a priest about it, and we know that the priest seemed to be positive and really accepting of this event. And it makes sense because you have a very humble man who is there at the church. You've seen these type of people at your church. The men who assist in setting up the altar, who assist in the pancake breakfast, like these kind of guys. And now this man is telling the priest, hey, I have a stigmata. The priest is going to accept it because he knows that Irving is a good person and wouldn't make this up. And we also know that there were some differences in what he went through that we don't really see in other stigmatists. First, as I described earlier, the fact that he went through the stigmata every single day. This is very rare. And another thing he would add is that he saw the faces of the people that he was suffering for. And this is key. This is so important because I have been talking about these type of experiences and events for years now. And it was this that really made me connect everything with the stigmata and redemptive suffering. He was suffering like Christ for people, and he would even say he would see their faces during these events. And that is also very important. So he would describe himself going into this trance-like state, and he would certainly feel the pain and feel the pain of the wounds, but he would see the faces of the people that he was supposed to be praying for. And then also he did say that his hands, as his brother recounted, his hands would hurt and bleed more on certain feast days, and that's common for stigmatists. But then also as he would pray for people, which makes sense if the stigmata is a form of redemptive suffering. But our insights to the life of Irving Houle really pick up when his healing ministry began. So Irving continued to receive these interlocutions and messages alongside continuing suffering from the stigmata, and he would write these messages down. So years later, by the way, clerics and his family and friends, they would read these writings and they would recount how different of a tone of voice these messages were written in. Irving Hu was a man in his late 60s who spoke very simply and plainly, but all these messages were very verbose and written in a voice that was so very, very different from Irving's. But on May 2nd, 1993, Irving received his first message calling him to a healing ministry, and this time it came from the Virgin Mary. All of his other messages had been from Christ. What the message said: "My dear son, go out and touch my children. Your hands are my son's hands. Continue to evangelize. Bring back many to the sacrament of penance and celebrate the Eucharist. You are under the protection of me and my son. Look around. You are surrounded with love, love, love. Thank you, my son." So let's remember, around this time, May 2nd, this is less than a month after his initial stigmata. So he was probably still getting used to this new life of going through the pains of Christ every night. But then also, we must remember that Irving Hu was a very, very reserved man. He did not even want to tell anyone that he had the stigmata. So this call to go and pray over people was a bit concerning to him. It did not feel natural or right. But Mary kept on going, sending him messages. On June 8th, 1993, she reminded him, saying, "My beloved son, I come to you this night to tell you how much your prayers and suffering have meant to my son and I. You are to use your hands to pray for our children. I am your mother, and I will show you the way. Just trust in Jesus, for he will allow no harm to come to you." So these messages would continue, but Irving, as I said, a very reserved man, really did not want to do this. He was reluctant to even tell anyone about the stigmata, so now he certainly would not want to go and lay hands on people, but he did confide this to a priest, and the priest then went to his bishop, and the bishop had been aware of the stigmata events already. The bishop launched kind of an informal investigation. We do know that a representative did see the stigmata one night, but we don't really know too much. However, we do know that the bishop was quite well aware of what was going on. The bishop agreed, though. He agreed that Irving could start this healing ministry. And Irving also said, "Look, I do not want to preach. I do not even want to speak. I simply have been called and told to put my stigmata hands on people and pray over them. That is all I'm asking." And the bishop agreed. So he began this small healing ministry. And this would often happen after Mass, always in a Catholic church. People would just line up, and Irving would lay his hands over them and often whisper a silent prayer, or even something to himself, or an Our Father or a Hail Mary. And instantly, miraculous healings began to occur. Chronic illness, terminal illness, cancer, blindness, and much more was cured. One very influential man who was healed was a man named Terry Saunders, who had been diagnosed with a very rare form of cancer. And he went to his priest, and the priest recommended he go see Irving. And Terry did not even know about the stigmata. He did hear, but there was this man doing healings, but that's all he knew. The stigmata wasn't even really discussed. He went to go see Irving and noticed there was bandaged on his hand, so he kind of put two and two together. But after just one of his prayer sessions, Terry said he felt a heat going through his entire body. And on his next checkup, there was no more tumors, cancer, anything. And it already spread to various organs, but now it was gone. Terry actually asked them to perform surgery to open him up to double check, and there was nothing there. Terry would later become a deacon, and he is now a champion for the canonization of Irving. Another person that was very influential who caught wind was a notable priest named Father George Fox. He was a priest and author, and he kind of handled a lot of supernatural events of the faith, investigating them and then promoting them. And he would begin promoting Irving's healing sessions and also being the priest to do the Eucharistic aspects of it, to actually host the Mass of these events if it wasn't part of a Sunday service already. And George Fox would also write a book called A Man Named Francis, and that's the source of most of this information for this episode. But regardless, largely out of his own pocket, Irving would travel the country with his simple healing ministry, and thousands of miracles were attributed to this. Eventually, Escanaba would receive a new bishop, so now he would have to get permission again to keep this going. The bishop also investigated Irving and his ministry, and he approved him to keep it going. And if you are watching this on video, so on Spotify video or YouTube, I am playing right now a clip of one of these healing ministries. And it is very simple. People go up, and sometimes they ask for what they want to be prayed for. Other times it's just silent, but you can see the emotion in these people's faces. And it's said that his hands would become so hot and warm that he would need to dip them into a bowl of ice water on the altar. And you also have footage of this if you are watching the clip. So he's a very interesting man, and these events were incredible. And every time I research this, if I'm pulling some information from YouTube or even if I'm posting about it online, I see so many people saying, yes, he prayed over me. Yes, I was filled with grace. Yes, I was filled with this Holy Spirit. Or yes, he healed me, or he healed one of my relatives. And he would continue this healing ministry for over 15 years. He started in 1993. It really picked up around 1998, and he did this until his death in 2009. However, due to his reserved nature, he didn't even go by his real name. But after he died, they started to use his real name and in various books and various articles about him. In fact, his obituary even states that he had the stigmata. Now, an obituary like that, he is buried in a Catholic church, that means that the diocese approved of it and also approved of mentioning the stigmata in his obituary, which is very, very pivotal to his story. But after his death, he was so reserved, I think, that many people didn't really continue with the pushing of this simple man's ministry. So he's been forgotten a little bit. But as I said, every time I talk about him, people reach out and tell me they've heard of him or were healed by him. So after his death, a cause for his canonization opened rather quickly. We also need to note that the stigmata was never formally investigated. We do know that a small team observed it, but there wasn't any large testing. I have heard rumors that there was some testing that was done in Huntsville, and EWTN was involved. I think that's just a rumor, but we do know that there was never a formal decree of investigation. Irving himself said he did not want one, not because he was faking it, but because he said that would distract from his healing ministry. And even then, even if we were to not believe in his stigmata, we can believe in the thousands of miracles that have been attributed to him. But regardless, there was never this formal investigation, and his cause for canonization does not have anything to do with the stigmata, but rather his life of virtue and his healing ministry. And that's very common for saints, by the way. If they receive a stigmata or even a vision, oftentimes what's most important is their life of virtue. But regardless, he is on his way, hopefully, to beatification and canonization, and he's still kind of this lesser-known figure. So I'm hoping this episode really pushes you to dive more into his story and to also pray for him and his eventual sainthood. And I think what's really important here, too, is the timing. So this is the 90s. Pope John Paul II is at his peak. Catholicism is seeing a bit of a revival. So we have this new evangelization, and now we have this regular blue-collared grandpa. And he is this mystic and healer, and this is showing that sainthood is available to everyone, not just the monks and nuns. And in this instance, miracles are for everyone, not just the religious and the monks and nuns. And I think that is incredibly important. Also, not to put a dark cloud over this, but this was also at the beginning of some pretty bad sex abuse scandals, which also is very interesting because now we have a layman, a very safe person, a grandfather, someone everyone trusts, a good person in the community, a harmless person in the community. And he is saying, I have the hands of Christ, and I am going to pray over you. You might be distrusting of the church right now, but trust me, I'm just a grandfather, and I just want to pray over you. And I think that was very much needed during this time of the church. I think it's still needed to this day. So I was going to end this episode with a transcript from an interview Irving Houle did with Father Fox for the book A Man Named Francis. But I found something better. I found the actual recording of the interview. So let's end this episode with the man himself, with the words and the voice of this gentleman we have been speaking of for the last bit, Irving Houle. It was an interview he did regarding his stigmata and his life. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you are not subscribed or following me, please do. Please share this with a friend, and please join me as we pray for Irving Houle and his sainthood. God bless you.
The Church of the New Covenant, and we have been discussing the role of the cross and suffering in living an authentic Catholic Christian life. And I have a guest for this part of the program, Francis. We made some programs here 5 years ago. and were well received. And I want to give you a little background here on Francis. In 1993, he received the wound marks in his hands on Good Friday, and every night after 12 o'clock, between 12 and 3, he goes through the sufferings of Jesus Christ. I have been with him various times when he goes through these sufferings. And I do want to say, those who want information about Francis, please do not be writing EWTN. We tell you on this program how you can get the various books. I've written the book on his life, Francis, and with our Fatima Family Apostolate, you are able to get these books. People, you know, want to go to his state, to his home, and they have no idea what they're doing. And when they phone me or write me, I say, have you got the book? Have you read the book? You read the book first. Then you know what you are doing. And when we interview someone like this doesn't mean that EWTN is giving a blanket endorsement, although I can say that Francis Bishop, he certainly has given you support, hasn't he?
He sure has.
He called you in. What did he say when he called you in?
Oh, those many things, Father. Let's not go into that.
Well, what he says, I want you to know you have my support. And our Lord did not tell you to go out and speak to people. This is rather an exception. He said, touch my people.
Touch my children.
And you pray over them and touch them. And this starts in 1993. How many people would you say you have touched and prayed over by now?
He told me it's approximately 60,000.
Approximately 60,000.
60,000.
What happens to these
all
people?
All over the country, you know.
What happens to them when you pray over them and touch them?
You don't hear back from all of them. It's just impossible. But so many report to their priest and different committees and letters that I get how the Lord touched them and their family. And what, you know, and that's just beautiful to see. Because there are physical healings, and there are people coming back to the church and the sacraments. And just from reading that book, Father.
What effect, you know, when I was writing this book, Francis, at that time I would ask him questions, and he would answer all my questions. I don't even know if you realize that I was asking you at the time to get information for the book. But after the book was published, which he never read the book, it's been like pulling hen's teeth to get information out of him about the suffering that he goes through at night and the like. Your wife told me she read the book and she learned a lot of things about you she did not know about, you know, the sufferings. And the reason I have you on this program, because during this series, Reclaiming Your Children for the Faith, I have been emphasizing that prayer and suffering is essential for conversion and reconversions. My estimate is that thousands of people, through the mission Jesus has given you, have come back to the sacrament.
Oh, yes. That's what these priests tell me, and different ones on these committees. And it's so wonderful to hear. I'd rather see that than a physical healing, because this is healing of the soul.
And when you pray over people, are priests hearing confessions?
Oh, you should see some of the, when there's like 2,000 or so at these larger churches, they'll have 5 to 6 priests.
I heard one time there's 8 priests hearing confessions.
Yeah, and the lines up are over a half a block line on all of them.
And I heard one priest said for a month afterwards, people were coming back. My last confession was 10, 20, 30 years ago.
He told you that.
That's what I heard from a priest.
Yes.
And a lot of fallen ways have come back to the church.
Definitely.
What do people tell you who have read the book?
That book, Father, has touched many, many. Now, I have letters home. Different priests have letters. My brother has them. Kathy Crombie has them. Of people that read that book, doesn't know me or doesn't know you or my family, and they've written a letter this book made me come back to my faith.
That's wonderful.
So it must be a
Because I know,
beautiful
you know, God didn't give you this mission. I think it starts at the age of 70, well, in your 70s anyway, early 70s.
Yeah, well, 69.
And your family is grown up and they're married. You have grandchildren. And I know, I've seen you hour after hour praying over people. As a rule, you don't travel to do this anymore. And
I just stopped that.
yeah, you used to travel, but you're getting older, you just can't do this, and people have no idea what it takes out of you. My idea was that through the book, tens of thousands, the first printing was 10,000 and sold out in a short time. Many people you could touch, you would not be able to touch physically.
That's right. You're right.
And that was my plan, and you're telling me that is what is happening.
Mm-hmm.
Now, tell us about some of the impressive things that impressed you that when people have come forth. What most impresses you?
You know, this will probably sound strange to a lot of people. But when they come forward and you touch them and they start crying, that means so much to me.
When they cry. Just like you do so easily. and I've seen people, you know, that just go over backwards. They call it slain in the spirit. And of course, once in a while, there's some people who want attention and they put on an act. And they're quite easy. They're quite easy.
This crying is coming from the heart.
Yeah.
And they're
when they cry, and then I've seen them, and then they get up and they go over and knee before the Blessed Sacrament.
Before the Blessed Sacrament.
And then they
right
look around.
after.
Is a priest hearing confession?
Yes.
I've heard confessions after you were touching people. Do you think your mission has concerned holiness of the family? A call for the holiness of the family in some way?
I think so, Father. I think so. There's a lot of families now. You know, I don't like to talk about this.
I know you don't. I know you don't. He finds it very difficult to talk about the suffering. Even, as far as I know, I'm the only one that talked to you one time when you were in ecstasy at night, but you didn't remember it the next day. And at that time, I asked you about the suffering. Even when you were in ecstasy, you wouldn't tell me. The first time I met Francis, just perfume was all around you, but never again. But other people have told me they experienced this. And this was a sign to me of authenticity. And I knew I wasn't imagining it. How have you ever talked to young people? Well, how young people respond?
I love to be with the teenagers, and about a year ago I was with 300 in the town near Ann Arbor, and that touched me more than probably I touched them, because I could see these teenagers. They'd come up crying, and they'd want to apologize to me what they've been doing. And I'd say, there's many priests here in confessions. Talk to them.
And they know about the wound marks?
Oh, yeah. They were told ahead of time.
Yeah.
But I just love working with the youth, Father.
And if they know that you love them and tell them the truth, that's the problem. None of people are telling them the truth.
Yeah.
Now, if you met someone that you know has left the Catholic Church, what would you say to them?
I'm never afraid to talk to them about it. But, Father, you have to be awfully careful. You have some that are bitter, some that just faded away, some that are lukewarm. You handle them all different.
Yes.
The bitter one, you got to move slow.
Now, if somebody is real bitter and they know that God has given you this charism, you still have to be very careful.
Very careful.
Give us an example of what you might do or say.
I ask them, you want to come to church with me someday, or someday I'll pick you up, or we'll do this or that, and we go in the afternoon if you wish. And they say, no, 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 no. I say, you know, that hurts me, because eternity is a long time.
You actually say that hurts
You
me.
bet. That hurts me. Oh, that hurts me when people...
That's what parents should be saying to their children and don't practice, right?
Eternity's a long time, buddy.
Mm-hmm. And would you tell them what they're missing?
Yes. Oh, yes.
For example?
That Eucharist. Our Mass and our Eucharist that they walked away from. And you know, it's sad. There's so many today now that haven't had any Christianity or religion in the home.
Yeah.
And these kids grew up with none of that.
Mm-hmm.
I think those can be touched, because I know our little group at home have gotten.
You know, Francis, since I founded, it's the beginning close to 17 years ago now, the Fatima Family Apostolate for the Holiness of the Family, God has brought me into contact with 3 persons who have special charisms like yours, and every one of them are married. I recently returned from Syria, where this woman gets the stigmata, a lady, a Sophronia. And God seems to be working through married people to bring people back to the truth. Now, I know you don't like to talk about the sufferings, but at night, and I've seen you go through the sufferings, and then all of a sudden you relax. Does God let you know who you were especially suffering for? I mean, does he give you a name? Does he show you the person?
No name. He shows me groups. I think I went that far with you. You know, it's hard when I hate to discuss something that I feel is personal between me and our Lord.
Yes.
Even to discuss it with you,
I know.
It's hard for me to discuss it with the whole world.
Yeah.
Right now. So.
But you can help so many people. You can help. Hey, you one time told me, and I ask you, you know, I see you go through this suffering and your hands are up like that, and pretty soon you go, and I thought, your brother, Ren, was with me. I said, he's not breathing. Yeah, you could just breathe. And then you took a deep breath and you relaxed. I shouted in your ears, Francis, as loud as I could. I couldn't even get you to blink your eyelids. And I asked you afterwards, what is happening? And you said, our Lord is then showing me the people I have been suffering for. And he goes through tremendous suffering of the crucifixion. It starts with the crowning of the thorns. Whenever you have been with me, it always starts at the stroke of midnight, because most mortal sins are committed after midnight.
Yeah, between 12 and 3.
And see, he's suffering to save souls, and this ought to get the point across. If you want to reclaim a person who has left the church not practicing the faith, you're going to have to pray. You're going to have to do some suffering. Agreed?
Right.
And
you know, people don't offer up. I talk to so many. They don't offer up their day, and they seem to be good churchgoers and stuff. But you bring that up to, what do you mean offer your day up? And I tell them, don't put your feet on the floor in the morning until you offer that day up to Jesus. He offered himself up to us. So I am really working hard on that now, of getting people to, I spoke to a group the other night, and I really stressed on that.
That's the morning offering.
Yeah,
Jesus,
it's
the Immaculate
so easy.
Mary, offer thee all my prayers
You're
with
supposed to
joy
say your,
and sufferings of this day.
of this day, yeah.
I was taught in the seminary, as soon as that alarm goes off, to say, behold, I come to do your will, O God. And I think that many people don't realize by the slightest little thing, St. Teresa of Lisieux taught us, the little white, a little flower, even picking up a pin we see on the floor, can be meritorious for the salvation of souls.
I can remember when we were all little kids on the farm. I can remember my mother saying this, and this many years ago. Did you say your morning prayers now, boys?
Well, thank you, Francis, for being on this program, showing us the great value of suffering for the conversions of people.
Pleased to be here.